The lawyer showed up at my sister's funeral like it was an appointment, then read a new will dated 3 weeks before she died. One line erased what she'd promised me for years. I didn't argue in that lounge. I drove straight to her bank because lies always leave a trail. I'm 72 years old, and I've learned there are 2 kinds of grief. The first kind is the clean kind. The kind where you sit in a quiet room, stare at a jacket still hanging on a chair, and let the absence speak for itself. The second kind comes with paperwork, side eyes, and people who suddenly remember how much they deserve the moment a casket closes. That second kind is what I met the day we buried my sister Marianne. Marianne was 68, younger than me, but always the one who sounded older. Careful, practical, the type to label keys and keep folders for everything. She'd been a hospital billing supervisor for decades. Not glamorous, but she understood systems, codes, signatures, dates, the exact things people underestimate until money is on the line. When she got sick, she didn't become helpless. She became quiet, and I didn't understand at the time that quiet was her way of listening. I drove to the funeral home that morning with my daughter Sophie in the passenger seat. She's 26 now, old enough to have her own life, but she still looks at me the way she did when she was little, like she's checking whether I'm okay before she decides whether she's allowed to fall apart. Sophie wore a plain black dress, and my late wife's small silver cross. On her wrist was a thin bracelet, braided leather with a little silver clasp. I'd bought it for her years ago at a roadside craft fair when she was 15. It wasn't expensive, but it was hers. It had been with her through everything. High school finals, her first heartbreak, her graduation. That bracelet mattered to me for one reason. It was a symbol of what I could still protect. The funeral home was full of flowers that smelled too sweet, like perfume trying to cover something rotten. Family members I hadn't seen in years stood in small groups, whispering the way people do when they're pretending they're not whispering. My nephew, Daniel, Marianne's only child, greeted me with a hug that felt like a formality. "Uncle Ray," he said, patting my back twice. "Thanks for coming." I looked him in the eyes. I wouldn't have missed it. Behind him stood his wife, Kendra. She didn't hug me. She nodded, tight-lipped, her eyes moving quickly over my suit like she was estimating its value. Kendra had always been polite, the way a locked door is polite. Smooth surface, no warmth. "Mr. Halbrook," she said. "Sophie," Kendra added, like my daughter was an item on a list. Sophie gave a small smile. "I'm sorry for your loss." Kendra's expression didn't change. Yes, terrible. I'd been around enough terrible people to recognize when grief was real. Kendra's wasn't grief. It was impatience, like someone stuck in a long line they couldn't leave. Marianne's service was dignified. A short eulogy, a few stories, a photo board with pictures of her smiling in modest places, her back porch, the lake, the hospital staff party where she wore a silly crown. I kept my hands folded, listening, feeling the weight of her absence settle into my chest like wet sand. When the service ended, most people expected that slow drift toward coffee and awkward sandwiches, but Daniel's lawyer was there. That alone was odd. I spotted him near the side wall, a slim man in a charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase close to his body. He didn't look like a grieving friend. He looked like someone protecting a file. Daniel approached him quickly, and Kendra was right behind, one hand already resting on Daniel's arm, steering him like a shopping cart. Sophie leaned toward me. "Dad, why is a lawyer here?" "I don't know," I said, "but I don't like surprises at funerals." Daniel cleared his throat and raised his voice just enough to gather attention. "Everyone, if you could come into the small lounge for a few minutes," he said. "Mr. Pritchard needs to read something. It won't take long." Mr. Pritchard. That was the lawyer's name. People shuffled into the lounge like they were being invited to a second service. Folding chairs, beige carpet, a table with untouched cookies, and at the front Mr. Pritchard stood with his briefcase open. I sat in the second row. Sophie sat beside me, hands clasped tight in her lap. Daniel and Kendra sat in the front row. So did my cousin Elaine, Marianne's cousin, the one who always acted like she was family royalty. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but her posture was alert, almost energized. Mr. Pritchard spoke in a practiced tone, as if the room were a courtroom instead of a funeral home. "I'm sorry for your loss," he began. "Marianne Halbrook asked that I be present today to address her estate matters and to read the most recent version of her will. The word most recent hit my ears like a warning bell. I felt Sophie shift beside me. Elaine whispered to the woman next to her. Most recent? Oh my, Mr. Pritchard continued. This will is dated 3 weeks prior to Miss Halbrook's passing and supersedes all prior versions. 3 weeks. Marianne had been weak 3 weeks before she died. Not confused but tired. In pain. On medication. My hands tightened on my knees. Mr. Pritchard opened a folder and began reading. At first it sounded normal. Funeral expenses covered, small charitable donations, personal belongings to Daniel. Then his voice changed slightly, like he was turning onto the main road of the story. The remainder of Miss Halbrook's liquid assets, investment accounts, and the proceeds from the sale of her home are to be distributed to her son Daniel Halbrook. Daniel didn't react. Kendra's chin lifted a fraction, like she'd expected applause. Then Mr. Pritchard read the next part, and the room got sharper. With no additional bequests to Raymond Halbrook. No additional bequests. That wasn't just she left everything to her son. That was language used when someone was making a point, when someone wanted the record to show a deliberate exclusion. Sophie looked at me, confused, because she knew what Marianne had told us months earlier, back when she was still walking around her kitchen and making tea without trembling. Marianne had said plainly, "Ray, I'm leaving you the lake cabin. You've fixed it up for years, and Daniel has never cared about it. I want it to stay with you. It's family history." I hadn't asked for it. I'd even told her she didn't need to. But Marianne had insisted. Now in that beige lounge, the lawyer's words erased that promise like it had never existed. Mr. Pritchard kept reading, and each sentence felt like a door closing. The cabin was no longer mentioned as a specific bequest. A portion of Marianne's jewelry was listed as going to Daniel's spouse, Kendra Halbrook. Even a small line about family heirlooms was rewritten to favor Daniel's household. When the reading ended, the silence was thick and restless. Then the voices started, the kind that sound sympathetic but carry knives. Elaine turned toward me immediately. "Ray, well, that's what she wanted. We have to respect it." I stared at her. Marianne told me something different. Elaine's eyes narrowed. People say lots of things, but a will is a will. Kendra finally spoke, soft and controlled. "I'm sure this is hard, but Marianne was very clear near the end. She wanted things simple. Simple." I looked at Daniel. "Son, did you know about this?" Daniel's eyes flickered. "Mom, talk to Mr. Pritchard. She said she updated things." "What changed?" I asked. "Why would she cut out the cabin she promised me?" Daniel swallowed. "Uncle Ray, I don't know. Maybe she felt it was better this way." "Better for who?" Sophie leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Mr. Pritchard, did you meet with Marianne alone when she signed this?" Mr. Pritchard hesitated just long enough for me to notice. "I met with Miss Halbrook at her home." "Was anyone else there?" Sophie asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. Kendra's eyes went cold. Mr. Pritchard cleared his throat. "I can't discuss private conversations beyond what's necessary. The will was executed properly, with witnesses." Elaine made a frustrated sound. "This isn't the time to interrogate anyone. We're supposed to be honoring Marianne." That sentence, "honoring Marianne," was used like a shield. Like grief gave them permission to shut down questions. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse anyone in that room. I'd learned long ago that you don't argue when people are emotional and you don't understand the full board. But I watched. I watched the way Daniel kept rubbing his thumb against his wedding ring. I watched the way Kendra's hand stayed on his knee, squeezing lightly whenever the conversation drifted toward details. I watched Mr. Pritchard's briefcase, how quickly he latched it, how his eyes avoided mine. When the group began to break apart, people approached me with their little scripts. "So sorry, Ray. She must have had her reasons. Just accept it, you don't want family drama." Family drama. As if the drama was me asking why my sister's final wishes had suddenly changed while she was dying. Outside, the sky was flat and gray. Sophie and I stood near my car, away from the others, and she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. "Dad," she whispered. "That doesn't make sense." "No," I said. "It doesn't." Sophie's voice shook, not with anger but with fear. What if someone pushed her to do it? I looked back through the glass doors. Daniel and Kendra were talking to Mr. Pritchard now, their heads close together. Kendra smiled briefly. Small, satisfied. I felt something settle in me then. Not rage, not vengeance. A decision. Marianne was the careful one, the organized one, the woman who kept receipts for appliances she'd bought 10 years earlier, just in case. If her will truly changed, there would be a trail, and if it didn't truly change, if someone had helped it change, there would be a trail too. I opened the car door for Sophie. "Get in." She paused. "Where are we going?" I stared at my steering wheel a moment before answering, because saying it out loud made it real. "We're going to the bank," I said. "And then we're going to get records." Sophie blinked. "Records of what?" "The safe deposit box," I said. "Access logs, entry times, inventory lists, any paperwork Marianne filed. I want to know who went into her box, when they went in, and what was inside before she died." Sophie swallowed hard. "Can we even get that?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I know this. Nobody rewrites a careful woman's last wishes without leaving fingerprints somewhere." I started the car, and as we pulled out of the funeral home parking lot, my phone buzzed. A text from Elaine. "Let it go, Ray. Don't turn Marianne's funeral into a fight. The will was read. Accept it." I didn't respond, because I wasn't planning a fight. I was planning to find the truth, quietly, methodically, using the same thing people like Kendra never respect until it crushes them: paper, timestamps, and proof. The bank was only 15 minutes from the funeral home, but it felt like we drove through a different world to get there, one where grief didn't matter, and policies mattered too much. Sophie sat quiet, staring out the window. I kept both hands on the wheel, my mind replaying the lawyer's tone. "Most recent version. Supersedes all prior versions." The kind of language people use when they want you to stop asking questions. Marianne had banked at Lakeview Federal since before Daniel was out of diapers. She used to joke that the tellers knew her coffee order better than her own son did. If anyone had a trail, it would be there. We walked into the lobby, and the first thing I noticed was the camera dome in the corner above the entry. Then another one over the teller line. Then a third aimed toward the offices. Good, I thought. Let them record me. I'm not doing anything wrong. A young teller looked up. "Hi, how can we help you today?" "My sister passed away," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Marianne Halbrook. I need to speak with someone about her safe deposit box and account access logs." The teller's face changed the way faces do when you mention death. Not sympathy, procedure. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "But I do have a reason to be here today." Sophie stood beside me, arms folded tight, eyes alert. The teller nodded and disappeared into a back office. 2 minutes later, a woman in her 50s came out. Neat gray hair, wireframe glasses, the kind of professional calm that never fully relaxes. "Mr. Halbrook?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes. I'm Teresa Alvarez," she said. "Branch manager. Why don't you come into my office?" Her office smelled like lemon cleaner and printer ink, a framed certificate on the wall, a little bowl of wrapped mints that no one ever touched. She gestured for us to sit, then sat across from me with her hands clasped. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "She was a good woman." Miss Alvarez nodded. "How can I help?" I took a breath. At the service today, her lawyer read a will dated 3 weeks ago. It's inconsistent with what Marianne told me for months. Before I accept anything, I need facts. I need the safe deposit box access log, dates, times, names, and I want the inventory list of what was inside. Miss Alvarez's expression tightened in a way that told me she'd heard requests like this before. "I understand why you'd want that," she said carefully. "But safe deposit boxes are strictly controlled. Access after death depends on who's listed on the box and what documentation is provided." "I'm her brother," I said. "I'm not asking to take anything. I'm asking to confirm who accessed it." She nodded again, slower this time. "Are you a co-lacee on the box?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But Marianne told me years ago she kept family documents there. Photos, deeds, her father's watch. She said, 'Ray, if anything happens to me, you'll know where to find it.'" Sophie leaned in. She was very organized. She didn't do things casually. Miss Alvarez inhaled through her nose, then opened her computer. "Let me check what I'm allowed to check without violating privacy laws. What I can tell you is this: even next of kin can't automatically access a box. Typically, the executor or personal representative must be present, along with a death certificate. The bank then does an official viewing and inventory. So Daniel would have to be there, I said. Yes, Miss Alvarez answered. If he's the executor. I felt my jaw tense. And if he doesn't want me there? Miss Alvarez didn't answer directly. If the box is solely in Marianne's name, we seal it until we receive the appropriate documents. And the access logs, I asked. She lowered her voice slightly, like the walls could hear. Those are internal records. We don't release them unless required by a court order, subpoena, or unless the requester is an authorized party on the box. Sophie's fingers curled around her purse strap. So we're stuck. Miss Alvarez looked at Sophie, then back to me. Not necessarily. If there's a dispute, you should speak with an estate attorney. They can request preservation of records. Camera footage, entry records. Those things don't stay forever. That last part landed hard, because if someone had accessed Marianne's box improperly, the truth had an expiration date. I nodded slowly. How long does the footage stay? Miss Alvarez's eyes flickered. It depends on the system. Sometimes 30 days, sometimes less. 30 days. Marianne's will was dated 3 weeks before her death. If someone visited this bank around then, the footage could be close to disappearing. I leaned forward. Miss Alvarez, I'm not asking you to break rules, but I need you to understand something. My sister didn't change her mind overnight. And if she did, she would have explained it. She would have told me. There's a reason she didn't. Miss Alvarez held my gaze. I could tell she was weighing two things, policy and instinct. Finally, she said, if you retain counsel, have them send us a written preservation request. We take those seriously. Sophie said, can you at least confirm whether she had a safe deposit box here? Miss Alvarez hesitated again, then nodded once. Yes, she did. That was all she gave us. We left the bank with nothing in our hands, but my mind was already moving. Preservation request, estate attorney, time limits, cameras. In the parking lot, Sophie exhaled sharply. Dad, that felt like hitting a wall. It was a wall, I said. But walls have doors. You just have to find where the handle is. As I opened the driver's door, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at his name on the screen for a full second before answering. I put the call on speaker so Sophie could hear. Hello, I said. Daniel's voice came through tight and strained. Uncle Ray, where are you? At the bank, I said. A pause. Then, why? Because I want facts, I answered. Daniel exhaled like I'd disappointed him. This is not the time, Mom's gone. We're trying to get through today. I'm trying to get through today too, I said, my voice low. But I'm not going to pretend something makes sense when it doesn't. Kendra's voice cut in, faint but unmistakable, like she was standing right beside him. Ray, you're making this ugly. I felt something cold move through my chest. I'm not making anything ugly. I'm asking how a will changed 3 weeks before she died. Daniel's tone hardened. Mr. Maid will dull because a gridem Mr. Maiv rock. Nen. Pritchard said it was executed properly. Executed properly doesn't mean executed honestly, I replied. Sophie spoke up, calm but sharp. Daniel, did your mom ever tell you she was changing it? Another pause. Then Daniel said, she told me she wanted to protect the family. The family, I repeated. Or your household. Kendra's voice again, louder now. Ray, stop. This is what Marianne wanted. Everyone heard it. The will was read. Accept it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I just said, Kendra, if this is what Marianne wanted, you should have no problem with the bank records confirming it. Silence. Then Daniel spoke, softer. Uncle Ray, please, don't fight us. People are already talking. People are already talking. That told me more than he realized. Because people didn't talk unless someone fed them something. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Sophie looked at me with wide eyes. They're scared. They're controlling, I corrected. And control always shows itself when you ask for documentation. We drove to Marianne's house next. Not to snoop, not to steal, but to look for the thing Marianne loved more than comfort, order. Her neighborhood was quiet. Small ranch-style homes, winter lawns, the kind of place where people watched through curtains but waved like friends. Daniel's car wasn't there. Kendra's wasn't either. The front door was locked, but I still had Marianne's spare key on my ring. She'd insisted I keep it years ago. For emergencies, she'd said. I hesitated, key in hand, feeling the strange guilt of entering a dead person's house. Sophie touched my sleeve. "Dad, are we allowed?" "I'm her brother," I said quietly, and she gave me the key. "I'm not breaking in. I'm walking into a place she trusted me with." We stepped inside. The house smelled like Marianne lavender soap and old books, and underneath that the faint metallic scent of sickness, like the air remembered oxygen tanks and medicine bottles even after they were gone. The living room looked mostly normal, but something was off. Not messy, just disturbed. A throw blanket folded differently than Marianne would fold it. The side table drawer not pushed all the way in. A faint scuff near the hallway wall, like someone had bumped furniture moving quickly. Sophie whispered, "Someone's been here." "Yes," I said. We walked to her small home office. Marianne kept everything there: files, a desktop computer, a bulletin board with notes written in her neat block letters. The desk drawers were closed, but the top right one, her immediate documents drawer, was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Empty folders, a missing envelope slot, and in the back corner, the faint outline of dust where a thick binder had sat. Sophie swallowed. "They took something. Or they looked for something," I said. On the desk, under a stack of mail, I found a small notepad with Marianne's handwriting. It wasn't a diary, it was her kind of record. Short lines, practical reminders. One line jumped out at me because it wasn't a reminder. It was a warning. "Box, do not let D sign for me." I stared at it. Sophie leaned in. "D. Daniel? Or Dorothy?" I said automatically, then stopped. Marianne didn't know any Dorothy. She knew one D that mattered here. "Daniel." Sophie's voice dropped to almost nothing. "Dad." She was afraid. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sink into my bones. Then I kept looking. In the bottom drawer, under a folder labeled medical, I found a bank envelope, creased, half hidden, Lakeview Federal logo in the corner. Inside were two things: a printed receipt for a safe deposit box visit, and a copy of an authorization form. The receipt had a date, 2 weeks before Marianne died, and the name on the visitor line, typed, not handwritten, made my stomach tighten. Kendra Holbrook. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. "No." I read the receipt again, slower this time, like reading it wrong could change it. The form behind it was worse. It was a deputization authorization for safe deposit access, signed by Marianne. At least it was supposed to be. But I'd seen Marianne's handwriting my whole life. Christmas cards, checks, notes taped to her fridge. This signature looked like someone had tried to imitate her while wearing gloves. Sophie whispered, "That's not her." I didn't answer yet. I just stared at the paper until the edges blurred, because in that moment, the funeral home reading wasn't just unfair, it was staged. And suddenly every small thing made sense. The lawyer showing up at the funeral, the new will dated near the end, Kendra's confidence, Daniel's rehearsed sadness. They weren't grieving, they were managing. Sophie took the paper gently from my hands, as if it might cut her. "Dad, this is proof someone accessed the box. It's proof they wanted access," I said. "And it's proof they did it close to the end when she was weak." Sophie looked at me. "What do we do now?" I stared at Marianne's desk, at the empty outline where the binder had been, at the drawer left slightly open, at the small note she'd left like a message in a bottle. Then I said the only answer that made sense. "We get a lawyer," I told her. "Not Daniel's lawyer, ours." I took out my phone and searched for the probate attorney my coworker had used years ago when his own sister's estate turned into a war. "Margaret Hart," I called. Her office answered on the second ring. "Hart and Klein, this is Rebecca." "My name is Raymond Halbrook," I said. "I need to speak with Miss Hart. It's urgent. It involves a new will, safe deposit box access, and possible forgery." There was a pause on the other end. Then Rebecca said, "Can you come in today?" I looked around Marianne's office one more time at her handwriting, her neat folders, her life reduced to paper and absence. "Yes," I said, "today." As Sophie and I walked back out to the car, I felt grief pressing against my ribs again. But now it wasn't only grief for Marianne. It was grief for the fact that she'd been surrounded by people who saw her final weeks as an opportunity. And as I started the engine, I made myself one promise. I wouldn't accuse anyone without proof, but I also wouldn't let the proof disappear. Margaret Hart's office was in a brick building downtown, the kind with frosted glass doors and quiet hallways that make you lower your voice without being told. Sophie and I arrived with Marianne's bank envelope in my coat pocket like it was something fragile, and in a way it was. Paper doesn't look like much until it's the only thing standing between truth and a lie people have already agreed to believe. Rebecca, the receptionist, gave us a clipboard and a sympathetic look that didn't cross into curiosity. 5 minutes later, Margaret Hart stepped into the waiting area. She was in her early 60s, sharp eyes, hair pulled back, no wasted movement. She looked like someone who had listened to 1,000 family tragedies and still didn't flinch at the 1,001st. "Mr. Halbrook?" she asked. I stood. "That's me." She shook my hand firmly. "Come in." Her office was clean and practical. No dramatic art, no fake friendliness. Just files, a computer, and a small framed photo of a golden retriever that looked happier than anyone involved in probate law had a right to be. Margaret sat, opened a notebook, and looked at me directly. "Tell me what happened," she said. So I did. I told her about the funeral home lounge, the most recent will, the way my sister's promises vanished inside a few sentences, the pressure from family to accept it, the bank's refusal to release logs without authority. And then I placed the envelope on her desk and slid out the safe deposit receipt and the authorization form. Margaret didn't react theatrically. She simply read, slowly, then took off her glasses and held the signature form closer to the light. "This is supposed to be Marianne's signature?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but it doesn't look like her." Sophie leaned forward. "It's wrong. I've seen Aunt Marianne's handwriting my whole life." Margaret nodded once. "I believe you, but what matters is proving it." She tapped the receipt. "This says Kendra Halbrook accessed the safe deposit box 2 weeks before your sister died." "It says she was listed," I corrected. "The bank wouldn't tell me more." Margaret's eyes lifted to mine. "Even better, because if she was listed, the bank had paperwork, and paperwork has dates, IDs, and procedures. If those procedures were bypassed, that's a breach. If the paperwork was forged, that's criminal." My chest tightened. "So what do we do?" Margaret's answer came without hesitation. "First, we preserve evidence. Second, we stop anyone from cleaning up the trail." She opened a drawer, pulled out a legal pad, and began writing bullet points. "Your sister had a safe deposit box. We need access logs, deputy authorization documents, scanned IDs, and camera footage for every visit within the last 60 days. Sophie blurted. "The bank manager said footage might only be stored 30 days. Margaret's pen stopped mid-line. "Then we move today." She reached for her phone and hit a button. "Rebecca, I need you to draft and send a preservation letter to Lakeview Federal immediately. Email and fax. Request retention of all records, access logs, surveillance footage, and internal notes related to Marianne Halbrook's accounts and safe deposit box. Mark it urgent. Potential litigation and fraud." She hung up and looked back at me. "We also file a petition with the probate court to challenge the will, request supervised inventory of the box, and request an injunction preventing distribution until the dispute is resolved." I stared at her. "That sounds big." "It is," Margaret said, "but you don't get to be polite when someone is stealing a dead woman's voice." Sophie swallowed. "Will they know it's us?" "They'll know," Margaret replied, "and they'll react. That reaction can be useful." She asked for details. Marianne's address, Daniel's full name, what assets I knew existed, whether Marianne had mentioned previous versions of the will, whether I had any written communication with her about the cabin. I thought of the last text Marianne sent me months ago, when she was still strong enough to argue. "Ray, don't worry about the cabin. I already handled it. Daniel can have the house proceeds, but the cabin stays with you. Promise me you won't let anyone guilt you into giving it up." I pulled out my phone and found the message. My fingers shook slightly as I handed it to Margaret. She read it and nodded. "Good. Not a will, but it supports intent." Then she looked at the authorization form again. "We also need handwriting exemplars, checks, letters, anything with Marianne's signature. Do you have any?" "Probably," I said. She kept old files. Margaret stood and walked to a small cabinet. She pulled out a folder labeled Emergency Hearings, then sat again. Mr. Twine old files, for Bolioer. The old Fevargs the Bal de Narg, Tudea." "Halbrook," she said, voice steady. "I need to ask you something hard. Was your sister cognitively impaired near the end? Dementia, confusion?" "No," I said. "Weak, yes, on medication. But she knew who she was. She knew who I was. She knew what day it was most days. Margaret nodded. Then we can argue undue influence or fraud without the court dismissing it as she was confused. But we should still get her medical records showing capacity. Sophie's eyes filled. This is disgusting. Margaret didn't disagree. She just said, it happens more than people think. An hour later, we left her office with a plan and a timeline. Margaret would send the preservation letter and file an emergency petition within 24 hours. We would return to Marianne's house and gather legitimate signature samples. And Margaret would request a court-supervised appointment to open the safe deposit box, meaning Daniel and Kendra wouldn't be able to quietly remove anything else. As we walked to the car, Sophie asked, "Dad, what if they already took what they needed?" I opened the passenger door for her. "Then they got greedy," I said, "and greed always leaves a mess." That night, Sophie and I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of Marianne's papers spread out like evidence at a trial. We'd returned to her house and carefully photographed everything we touched. We didn't take jewelry. We didn't pocket keepsakes. We took only what mattered: signatures, dates, and proof of pattern. Marianne's old checkbook stubs, a copy of her driver's license, birthday cards she'd signed, a handwritten note to her neighbor about taking in the trash bins. Little ordinary things that suddenly became powerful. We found something else too, an earlier estate planning folder tucked behind a row of cookbooks in the kitchen cabinet above her coffee mugs. Marianne's kind of hiding place. Not secret, just where it belongs. Inside was a copy of an older will, dated 2 years ago. It clearly listed the lake cabin to me. It even included a line about no changes shall be made without independent counsel present, which told me Marianne had been thinking about pressure long before her final weeks. Sophie ran her finger over the pages. So she did have this planned. "Yes," I said, "and she put it in a place Daniel probably wouldn't look." My phone buzzed again. Elaine. I didn't answer her calls anymore, but she left a voicemail. I played it on speaker while Sophie listened. "Ray," Elaine's voice said, strained and sharp, "Daniel told me you've hired a lawyer. Are you out of your mind? This is going to tear the family apart. Marianne would be ashamed. Let it go. Stop making yourself look greedy." I stared at the phone after the voicemail ended. Sophie's voice was quiet. "They're already running a story." "Of course they are," I said. "If they can make me look greedy, no one will look at them." The next morning, Margaret called me at 8:12 a.m. "Mr. Halbrook," she said, "the preservation letter is sent. The bank acknowledged receipt." I felt a small relief, like catching a rope before it slipped away. Margaret continued. "Also, I need to warn you," Daniel's attorney responded. "Pritchard?" I asked. "No," Margaret said. "Different firm. He retained separate counsel as of this morning." "Of course he did. What did they say?" I asked. "They're claiming the will is valid, that Marianne was fully competent, and that your actions are harassment during a time of grief." Sophie, sitting across from me, mouthed, "Harassment?" Margaret's tone didn't change. "That language is meant to intimidate you. Don't engage directly. Let me handle communications." I rubbed my forehead. "Do we have anything from the bank yet?" "Not yet," she said, "but I'm pushing for an emergency hearing. Because if there's a deputy authorization signed 2 weeks before her death, there will be a bank employee who processed it, and they will remember who was standing at the counter." An hour later, Margaret called again, and this time her voice was different, more focused. "I obtained confirmation of a scheduled box inventory," she said. "The bank will allow a supervised opening in 48 hours, provided Daniel appears with identification and executor paperwork. If he refuses, we petition the court to compel compliance." "Will we be there?" I asked. "Yes," Margaret said. "You, me, a bank officer, and Daniel's side if they choose. Everything will be documented." I glanced at Sophie. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright with the same stubbornness I'd raised her with. "Okay," I said. "We'll be there." Then Margaret added one more thing. "One of my staff spoke to a former employee at Lakeview Federal, someone who transferred branches last year," she said. "She remembers Kendra Halbrook. Not from a funeral, not from helping her mother-in-law, from arguing, loudly, about access." My stomach tightened. "When? We're trying to pin down the date," Margaret replied. "But it supports the idea Kendra was pushing to get into that box before Marianne died." After I hung up, the house felt too quiet. Sophie walked to the sink, then turned back. "Dad, what if Daniel wasn't the mastermind? What if it's all Kendra? I stared at my kitchen table where Marianne's older will sat in a clear folder. Daniel is a grown man, I said. If he let someone use his mother's death like a tool, he's responsible. Even if he was weak enough to be led. Sophie nodded slowly. Will he hate you for this? I thought about the funeral. The way he'd ask me not to fight because people are talking. The way he didn't ask what was true, only what looked bad. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm not doing this to be liked. That afternoon we got our first real crack in the wall. Margaret forwarded me an email from the bank's legal department confirming they were preserving footage and internal access records. The message was formal, cautious, but it contained one line that made my hands go cold. It referenced multiple access events within the prior month. Multiple, not just one. Sophie read it over my shoulder. So someone went in more than once. Yes, I said. And I'm willing to bet Marianne wasn't walking into that bank multiple times near the end. The day before the scheduled inventory, Daniel finally showed up at Marianne's house while Sophie and I were there collecting the last handwriting samples. I heard his car door slam outside, then hard footsteps on the porch. The front door opened without a knock. Daniel stood there, face drawn, eyes red, not sure if from crying or lack of sleep. Kendra was behind him, perfectly composed, like she was arriving for a business meeting. Daniel looked at the papers spread across the dining table and his voice rose immediately. What are you doing? I stayed seated. I'm gathering Marianne's documents, the ones you didn't mention. Kendra stepped forward. You have no right to be here. I looked at her calmly. Marianne gave me a key years ago, and I'm not taking anything that belongs to you. Daniel's hands shook. Uncle Ray, why are you doing this? Mom is gone. I held his gaze. Because someone is trying to rewrite what she wanted. Kendra's eyes narrowed. That's a lie. I picked up the safe deposit receipt and held it up. Then explain this. Explain why your name is on a safe deposit access record 2 weeks before my sister died. Daniel's head snapped toward Kendra. What is he talking about? Kendra's smile didn't reach her eyes. It's nothing. Marianne asked me to help. She was tired. I went with her. I kept my voice even. Then you won't mind the bank's access logs and footage. Kendra's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Daniel noticed. I could see it in the way his eyes flickered between us. Sophie stood, voice steady. Daniel. Aunt Marianne left a note. It says box. Do not let D sign for me. Daniel went pale. That's not. I watched him struggle, like a man trying to keep a door closed while something heavy pushed from the other side. Kendra's voice sharpened. This is insane. You're grieving and making stories. I leaned forward slightly. No, I said. You're panicking because you thought no one would check. Daniel's voice cracked. Uncle Ray, please. Can we talk privately? Kendra snapped. Daniel. He didn't look at her. Not right away. That told me the truth was already inside him, even if he hadn't admitted it out loud yet. I stood slowly, feeling my age in my knees, and said, we can talk, but not to negotiate what Marianne wanted, only to tell me what happened. Daniel swallowed hard, and for the first time since the funeral, he looked less like an heir and more like a son who realized his mother might have been robbed before she was even buried. Tomorrow, he said quietly, at the bank, I'll be there. Kendra's head turned toward him like he'd slapped her. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat, because whatever was inside that safe deposit box, whatever had been taken, replaced, or hidden, was about to come into the light, and something told me it wouldn't just be documents. It would be a detail nobody could explain away. The next morning, I wore the same suit I'd worn to Marianne's funeral, not because I wanted to honor tradition, but because I wanted every person in that bank to remember my face. If this turned into a court fight, I wanted them to remember the difference between a grieving brother and a man trying to steal. Sophie came with me again. Her hair was pulled back tight, like she was bracing for impact. The leather bracelet was still on her wrist, the same one I'd bought her years ago. Margaret met us in the lobby of Lakeview Federal at 9 sharp. She carried a slim binder and a calm that felt like armor. Daniel arrived 2 minutes later. Not alone. His new attorney, a tall man with a confident smile, walked beside him like a handler. Kendra trailed half a step behind Daniel, sunglasses on even though we were indoors. I watched Daniel's hands. They were shaking. Kendra's were not. Mr. Halda trailed. Mr. Mutapifti. Kendra's were not. Alvarez, the branch manager, came out from behind the teller line. She looked more formal than last time, like she'd been told to keep her words clean and her tone neutral. "Good morning," she said. "We'll do this in the conference room, with a bank officer present. As discussed, this is a supervised viewing and inventory only." Margaret nodded. "Understood." Daniel's attorney stepped forward. "Thomas Riley. I represent Mr. Halbrook as executor." Margaret gave him a polite nod that didn't invite conversation. "Margaret Hart, representing Raymond Halbrook." We followed Miss Alvarez down a hallway to a secure room with a heavy door and a keypad. Inside was a long table, a couple of chairs, and a camera mounted high in the corner, clearly meant to record. Good, I thought again. Let the truth have a witness. A bank officer I hadn't met before introduced herself as Mrs. Keene. She wore white gloves like we were about to handle museum artifacts instead of family tragedy. Mrs. Keene laid paperwork on the table. "Before we proceed, I need identification from the executor and any parties present. This inventory will be documented. No items will be removed today without proper authorization." Daniel handed over his ID with stiff fingers. Riley handled the documents like he owned the room. Kendra didn't offer anything. She simply sat, crossed her legs and looked bored. Mrs. Keene stepped out, then returned with a long metal box, the safe deposit container, sealed with a numbered tag. The sight of it made my stomach twist. Marianne's life reduced to a piece of metal with a sticker. Mrs. Keene looked at Daniel. "As executor, you will confirm the seal number matches the record." Daniel leaned in, read it, and nodded. "Yes." Mrs. Keene cut the seal carefully and slid the metal container onto the table. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Kendra seemed to stop breathing. Mrs. Keene opened the lid. Inside were neat stacks of envelopes, a velvet pouch, a couple of small document folders, and a manila envelope marked in Marianne's handwriting. "Original Will, 2019. My heart jumped. Sophie's eyes widened. She looked at me, and I understood immediately. The older will existed here too, sealed and labeled. Margaret leaned forward slightly, but she didn't touch anything. She let the bank officer do the moving, because procedure is the foundation you build a case on. Mrs. Keene removed items one by one, placing them on the table and reading descriptions for the inventory sheet. "Velvet pouch," she said, weighing it lightly. "Appears to contain jewelry. A small key," she continued, "attached to a paper tag labeled cabin." My throat tightened. Then, folder labeled property. "Contains deed copies." Riley cleared his throat. "This means nothing. The will is the legal instrument." Margaret didn't even look at him. "Keep talking," she said calmly. "It helps." Mrs. Keene reached the bottom of the box where papers lay flatter, as if they'd been pressed down. She lifted a thin folder, and something small and dark slipped from beneath it and skittered across the table. It landed near Sophie's elbow, a braided leather bracelet with a silver clasp. For half a second my brain refused to name what I was seeing, because the object was so out of place it felt like a trick. Sophie froze. Her eyes dropped to the bracelet on the table. Then she slowly raised her arm and turned her wrist so everyone could see. The bracelet on her wrist, and the bracelet on the table. Identical. Same braided leather, same silver clasp, same tiny scratch near the edge of the metal where it had been bumped against a countertop years ago. But Sophie's wrist wasn't empty, which meant the one on the table wasn't hers in the simple sense. It was hers in the only way that mattered. It was the bracelet she had lost. Sophie's voice came out thin. "Dad." I stared at it like it might start talking. Margaret spoke first. "Whose bracelet is that?" Sophie swallowed, eyes glossy. "Mine. I lost it." Riley gave a short laugh that sounded forced. "Come on. It's a bracelet." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hand on the table. I simply asked Sophie, "When did you lose it?" Sophie's fingers trembled. "Last summer. At Aunt Marianne's house. I took it off when I helped her shower after she got sick. I left it on the bathroom sink. When I went back, it was gone." I looked directly at Kendra. Kendra's face didn't change much, but her eyes did. Fast, sharp movement, like a cornered animal checking exits. Daniel stared at the bracelet like he'd been punched. Margaret's voice stayed calm, but the room tightened around it. "So your bracelet went missing at Marianne's home, and now it's inside Marianne's safe deposit box." Sophie nodded slowly, terrified of what her own words meant. "Yes." Mrs. Keene stopped writing. Even she looked unsettled, because banks see a lot of drama, but not this kind. I turned to Daniel. Did your mom ever mention putting Sophie's bracelet in her safe deposit box? Daniel's mouth opened, then closed. No. Margaret leaned back slightly, giving the moment space to breathe, because silence can be more powerful than argument. Riley tried again, louder. This is irrelevant to the will. People put personal items in safe deposit boxes all the time. Margaret's eyes finally lifted to him. Not other people's items. Not items that went missing from the decedent's home. Not items the decedent never discussed with anyone. Kendra spoke, her voice too smooth. Maybe Marianne found it and put it in the box for safekeeping. Sophie snapped her head toward her. Then why didn't she tell me? She would have texted me the second she found it. Kendra shrugged lightly. People forget. I heard my own voice, low and steady. Marianne didn't forget things. She labeled a key cabin. She kept an envelope marked original will. She didn't forget to tell my daughter she found something she cried over for weeks. Daniel's breathing turned shallow. He stared at Kendra, searching her face like he was trying to read a language he'd ignored too long. Mrs. Keene cleared her throat. We will continue the inventory. Margaret nodded. Please do, and photograph the bracelet in place on the inventory sheet. Mrs. Keene hesitated, then pulled a small camera from a drawer and took several photos, wide shots of the table, close-ups of the bracelet, the envelopes, the labeled will. As she returned to the box, Margaret asked, Mrs. Keene, can you confirm for the record, access to this box requires either both keys and identity verification, correct? Mrs. Keene nodded carefully. Yes, or authorized deputy access on file depending on the account. Margaret turned her gaze to Miss Alvarez. Mrs. Alvarez, earlier you indicated you could not release logs without court order. But can you confirm whether a deputy authorization existed on file for Kendra Halbrook? Miss Alvarez looked uncomfortable. She glanced at Riley, then at Mrs. Keene, then back at Margaret. There was deputy access documentation processed recently. Margaret's voice stayed gentle, but it cornered the truth. Recently meaning before Marianne died. Yes, Miss Alvarez admitted. Riley jumped in, and that documentation was signed properly. Margaret didn't argue. She simply said, we'll let handwriting experts decide what properly means. Mrs. Keene continued the inventory. She lifted the envelope labeled Original Will, 2019. She did not open it fully, just enough to confirm contents. Then she pulled out another folder, unlabeled, newer, thinner. This one had a printed cover page that looked like it came from a law office printer. Mrs. Keene read the title aloud. Last Will and Testament, Marianne Halbrook, dated 3 weeks prior to death. The new will. The one read at the funeral. It was inside the box. Kendra's chin lifted slightly, like she thought that sealed the deal. But all I could think about was the bracelet again, lying there like a dropped mask. Because if that bracelet had been missing from Marianne's home and ended up in this box, someone had moved it. And the only people in Marianne's house during those weeks, aside from nurses, were Daniel and Kendra. Mrs. Keene reached the bottom of the box and removed one last item, a small white pharmacy envelope. Not the kind that holds pills, the kind that holds receipts. She opened it and slid out a folded slip of paper. Margaret leaned forward. What is that? Mrs. Keene unfolded it carefully. It appears to be a safe deposit box entry receipt. Miss Alvarez's eyes narrowed. That shouldn't be in there. Riley's voice got sharper. What does it say? Mrs. Keene read it, and I watched Daniel's face as each word landed. Entry date, 2 days after the deputy authorization was filed. Visitor, Kendra Halbrook. Primary lessee not present. The room went dead. Even Riley didn't speak immediately, because there's only so much you can spin when a bank officer reads the truth from the bank's own paper. Daniel's eyes went to Kendra, and for the first time his voice wasn't defensive. Kendra, he said quietly, you went into my mom's box without her. Kendra's lips pressed together. She asked me to. Daniel's voice cracked. Then why does the receipt say she wasn't present? Kendra's head turned slightly, like she was annoyed at the bank for being accurate. She was too sick to come in. She told me what to do. Margaret's voice cut through, controlled and precise. And what did she tell you to do, Miss Halbrook? Retrieve the new will. Place it inside the box. Remove the old will. Or remove other items that might contradict your story. Riley stood up abruptly. That's enough. We're not answering questions here. Margaret didn't flinch. Fine. Then we'll answer them in court. Sophie stared at the bracelet again, then up at Kendra. What were you doing in her box? Kendra's eyes flashed. Watch your tone. I spoke then, and my voice was calm enough to scare even myself. You don't get to scold my daughter. Not here. Not after this. Daniel looked like he was fighting nausea. Uncle Ray, I swear I didn't know about that receipt. I believed him, partially. I believed he hadn't known the details. I didn't believe he hadn't known something. Margaret gathered her binder and stood. Mrs. Keene, we request certified copies of today's inventory and all photographs. We also request a copy of deputy access documentation and all entry logs within 60 days, and preserved footage as already requested. Mrs. Keene nodded, eyes serious now. We will coordinate through counsel. Riley snapped his briefcase shut. This is becoming a circus. I looked at him. No, I said. A circus is when clowns perform. This is when thieves get nervous. As we walked out of the conference room, Sophie stayed close to me. Her hand gripped my sleeve the way she used to when she was a child walking through a dark hallway. Outside the bank, she finally whispered, Dad, that bracelet, it's like Aunt Marianne left it there on purpose. I stared back through the glass doors at the security cameras above the lobby. I don't know if she left it, I said, but I know what it means. Sophie's voice shook. It means someone was in her box. Yes, I said, and it means whatever story they told at that funeral has holes big enough to drive the truth through. My phone buzzed a moment later, an email from Margaret. Subject line, next step, emergency petition filed. I read it once, then again, feeling the shift happen inside me. Because now we weren't chasing a suspicion, we were carrying evidence. And the people who told me to accept it were about to learn that paperwork doesn't care about family pressure. 2 days after the bank inventory, Margaret and I walked into probate court with a folder thick enough to make the bailiff raise an eyebrow. Daniel came in behind us with his attorney, Thomas Riley. Kendra arrived last, perfectly dressed, as if the right outfit could substitute for the truth. She sat beside Daniel, but this time he didn't lean toward her. He sat rigid, staring forward, like he was afraid to look at anyone and see what they already knew. I'd been in court once years ago over a contractor dispute. This was different. This was my sister's last voice being argued over like a piece of furniture. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, calm and unsentimental. She glanced at the pleadings, then looked directly at Margaret. Miss Hart, she said, you're challenging the decedent's will based on what grounds? Margaret didn't over-explain. Your Honor, we are challenging the validity of the will dated 3 weeks prior to death on the grounds of fraud and undue influence. We have evidence of questionable safe deposit box access, a forged deputy authorization form, and irregularities surrounding execution. We request a temporary injunction against distribution and an order compelling production of bank logs and surveillance footage. Riley stood. Your Honor, this is speculation fueled by grief. The will was executed properly with witnesses. Mr. Holbrook is the executor and the named beneficiary. The challenger is simply unhappy with the result. The judge's eyes moved to me. Mr. Holbrook, she said, you are the challenger? Yes, Your Honor. What is your relationship to the decedent? I'm her brother, I said, 72 years old. Marianne and I were close. She told me for months what she intended, and it doesn't match what was read at her funeral. The judge's gaze sharpened slightly. I'm not interested in family disappointment. I'm interested in evidence. Miss Hart, Margaret slid a copy of the bank receipt and the photographed inventory across the table to the clerk. Safe deposit box entry receipts show access by the decedent's daughter-in-law without the decedent present. The supervised inventory revealed 2 wills in the box, including an envelope labeled Original Will 2019. Additionally, a personal item belonging to Mr. Holbrook's daughter, previously reported missing, was found inside the box. Riley scoffed softly. A bracelet? The judge held up a hand. Mr. Riley, let me decide what matters. She read for a long moment. Then she leaned back. I am granting a temporary injunction, she said. No distribution of estate assets until this matter is resolved. I am also ordering Lakeview Federal to produce access logs, deputy authorization documents, and preserved surveillance footage pertaining to safe deposit access within 60 days prior to death. Finally, I am ordering both wills submitted for forensic document examination. Kendra's posture shifted, just a fraction. But I saw it, like a woman who'd built her confidence on people staying quiet. Outside the courtroom, Riley approached Margaret with a tight smile. "You're turning a family tragedy into litigation theater." Margaret's voice was flat. "No. Someone already turned it into theft. We're just putting it on record." Daniel hung back, watching us like a man standing between two fires. When Kendra stepped away to take a call, he moved closer to me. "Uncle Ray," he said, voice low, "I didn't put that bracelet in the box." "I know," I said, "but you let your wife into your mother's life when she was vulnerable. That's not nothing." His eyes filled, and for the first time since the funeral, he looked like someone who might actually be grieving. "She said Mom wanted her help," he whispered. "She said Mom didn't trust you because you'd push for the cabin. She made it sound like you were the one with an agenda." I felt something ache behind my ribs, not anger, not satisfaction, just the dull pain of watching a family break apart in slow motion. "Daniel," I said quietly, "when someone wants you to hate a good person, it's usually because that person is a problem for their plans." He swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "the truth gets louder than the story." 2 weeks later, the bank's evidence arrived through Margaret's office. Not rumors, not opinions. Evidence. The access logs listed every entry: date, time, employee initials, method of access, and whether the primary lessee was present. There were 3 entries in the month before Marianne died. 1 with Marianne present, assisted by a nurse. 2 with Kendra alone. The deputy authorization form, scanned and stored, was in the file. The signature didn't match Marianne's known signature samples, and the ID used to verify Marianne for the deputy authorization wasn't her driver's license at all. It was a photocopy of her old passport, expired. Margaret circled that in red ink when she showed it to me. "Banks shouldn't accept this," she said. "But someone did." "Who?" I asked. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "That's where the footage comes in." When we viewed the surveillance clips, my stomach turned cold. The first clip showed Marianne, thin and tired, sitting in a chair near the offices while a nurse held her arm. She looked lucid. She looked like herself, small but steady. The second clip, 2 days later, showed Kendra walking into the lobby alone wearing a bright scarf. She carried a folder and a small zip pouch. She spoke to a teller at the counter for a long time, leaning in, smiling. Then her expression changed, harder. She gestured with her hand like she was scolding. The teller disappeared into the back and returned with a supervisor. Kendra went to the safe deposit corridor, alone. The third clip, about a week after that, showed her returning, again alone. This time she carried nothing in, and she left with the same folder, thicker, as if something had been inserted. Margaret paused the video and zoomed in as much as the grainy camera allowed. "Look," she said. As Kendra turned, something slipped from her hand, a small dark object. She caught it quickly and shoved it into the folder without looking. I stared at the screen, my throat tightening. "That's the bracelet," Sophie whispered from behind me. Kendra hadn't placed it as a keepsake. She'd carried it like a tool, something she'd taken from Marianne's house, probably by accident or on purpose, and then dropped in the box while swapping papers. A mistake. And mistakes are the enemy of people who live by deception. The forensic document examiner's report arrived a few days later. Marianne's signature on the deputy authorization form, not genuine. Marianne's signature on the new will, not genuine. The new will witnesses, 2 names that traced back to Kendra's circle. One was a former co-worker, the other a friend of a friend. Their statements were inconsistent. One claimed the signing happened at Marianne's home. The other claimed it happened at a coffee shop. Marianne was bedridden the day they claimed she was at a coffee shop. Even better, worse, really. The notary stamp on the new will belonged to a notary whose commission had expired. Margaret didn't smile when she told me. She just said, "This is what fraud looks like when it stops being careful." The next court hearing was the one that changed everything. Kendra sat behind Riley's table now because Daniel had separated his representation. He showed up with his own attorney, face hollow, like sleep had become something he watched other people have. The judge reviewed the forensic report, the bank logs, and the footage summary. Then she looked at Kendra. "Miss Halbrook," she said, "do you maintain that the will dated 3 weeks prior to death reflects the decedent's wishes?" Kendra's voice was firm. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly. "Then you have a problem." The judge turned to Margaret. "Miss Hart, what relief are you requesting?" Margaret stood. We request the court declare the new will invalid due to forgery, reinstate the prior will as controlling, remove Daniel Halbrook as executor given the compromise process, appoint a neutral administrator temporarily, and refer the evidence of forgery and unlawful access to the district attorney. The judge's eyes moved to Daniel. Mr. Halbrook, do you object? Daniel's voice broke. No, Your Honor. Kendra snapped her head toward him. Daniel. He didn't look at her. I didn't know, he said, voice shaking. But I should have, and I'm not covering for her. The courtroom went silent, the kind of silence that feels like gravity. The judge signed the order. Just like that, the story told at Marianne's funeral collapsed under the weight of timestamps and ink analysis. The old will, the one Marianne actually signed, was reinstated. The lake cabin was mine, exactly as she'd promised. And more importantly, Marianne's name was returned to herself. Kendra didn't walk out in handcuffs that day. Courtrooms aren't always dramatic, but the referral was made, and the civil findings were clear. Within a month she was charged with forgery and attempted fraud. The bank also launched an internal investigation into how an expired passport copy had been accepted. Daniel lost more than money, he lost trust. Family members who'd texted me let it go stopped texting altogether. Elaine didn't apologize. She avoided me in grocery store aisles like I was contagious. But a few people did call quietly and say, I'm sorry, I believed the wrong person. Daniel came to my house one evening alone, without Kendra, without an attorney, without a script. He stood at my doorway, eyes red, hands empty. I ruined it, he said. I didn't invite him in immediately, not to punish him, to make sure he understood this wasn't a reset button. You didn't forge the signature, I said, but you let your mother's last weeks become a negotiation. You listened to your wife more than you listened to the woman who raised you. He nodded, tears spilling now. I know. After a long moment, I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place Sophie and I had spread Marianne's papers. Daniel stared at the wood grain like he was trying to read answers from it. I loved her, he whispered. I believe you, I said. But love without protection is just a feeling. Marianne needed protection. He flinched, but he didn't argue. In the spring I went to the lake cabin alone for the first time since the court order. I walked through the rooms I'd repaired over the years. Patched roof, new flooring, shelves. Marianne had teased me for sanding twice. On the mantel was an old photo of Marianne and me as kids, both missing front teeth, holding fishing poles too big for our hands. I sat on the porch for a long time and listened to the wind off the water. I didn't feel victory. I felt something quieter. Closure. Because justice, when it's real, doesn't make you loud. It makes you able to breathe again. Here's what I learned, what I want you to take from my sister's story. If someone tells you, accept it, don't cause drama, they might be asking you to surrender your right to ask questions. If someone is rushing you after a death, it's because time helps liars more than it helps truth. And if you ever feel that something doesn't match the person you knew, don't argue feelings. Go find records, logs, signatures, footage, inventory. The boring things that don't care who's crying in the room, because paper doesn't get manipulated by guilt. People do. If you were in my position, standing at a funeral, hearing a new will flip everything against you, what would you do? Would you let it go for peace, or would you ask for proof? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, stories where the truth doesn't scream, it documents, subscribe to the channel and stay with me.